the custom list and all these others. We're going now to work on the database handler that is going to create for us the database and all, and we're also going to create a class. So we've been saving our students to the database, so we have to create a student class, or we call it a data model class, that assists us to have the values of the students to be stored. So here we are going to create a Kotlin file. So you right click, and we'll create a new Kotlin class. So we'll say new Kotlin class. So let's specify it as a class. Then we can call this student. So we call that student, and we say in this student, what do we want to save? We want to save the name, we want to save the email, and we want to save the ID. So we'll say student class. So what we'll simply can do this class, it will be quite simple. So this class we want to have var, then we can say user ID, then we'll say let this be an integer, and then we'll say we want var, then we can say user name, this be a string, and lastly var, then we can say user, so you can say user email, and let also this be a string. So we create a class, and the class will pass the name, ID, and email. So that's a simple model class that you're going to be using. So the next part, we are going to create our database handler. So our database handler is a class that will extend the SQLITE open helper class that is going to create for us the database and insert data by using content values and objects of insert method. So now we are going to create our handler. So we'll say new, then we go to Kotlin class. So we create a class, and we are going to call this class database handler. So we say database, so we say database handler dot Kotlin. So we have our database handler dot Kotlin. Then we have that. So we have database class handler. So the first thing we are going to do, we are going to pass the context and then extend to the SQLITE open helper that is going to create for us the database. So we'll just say class database. So what we do, we just pass the context here. So you just create, then you say we want to pass the context as a context. So we pass context as a context. Then now we'll say let the database handler extend. So we are going to extend this one. We did it in SQL, how to do to use extend. So we extend SQLITE open helper. So this open helper, hii ndio ita to create a database. So we extend the SQLITE open helper. So you can say SQLITE open helper. So once we extend the open helper, this open helper has a constructor and they have to be initialized. So we are going to pass what needs to be passed in the helper. So the first one is the context. So we pass the context. Then the next thing we're going to pass is the database name. So we'll say database name, comma. So you can see there are a few items you're going to pass in the SQLITE open. So we have here the context, we have the database name, so we are going to write all of them here, then initialize. So the first one will pass the database name, which we're going to create inside our constructor. So database name, then we have a nullable version, so we'll say null, and then lastly the database version. So that is what you're going to pass inside our SQLITE open helper. So up and down we'll have to create our companion object that is going to define the database name and all the other items that you're going to need. So we'll call our companion object, so to select to companion object. So companion object now will sort for us this database name. So we'll start with so we can say, we can call these functions private val, then we'll say, or we can just say, we can call val, then we'll say database version, then we'll say equals to 1. So we have our database version as 1. Then we can say val, then we'll say database name. So we give our database name. Our database name will be, say, student database. So that is going to be the database name for us. And then the next one is going to be the, so in a database we know we have a database, so we create a database first, and then we create the table, and then after the table we create rows inside the tables, rows and columns. So rows and columns are the ones which hold the data for us. So we create the table, then we create the columns that are going to hold for the rows, or rather that are going to hold for us the data. So we'll come and say, then we'll say val, then we'll come and say table underscore contacts. So our table will be called contacts. So so we can say contacts equals to, then we'll say student table. So we have our student table there. Then inside the student table we are going to have ID, name and email. So we'll say val, then we'll say the first one is going to be key underscore. So we have first one to be ID, so we'll say ID equals to, then we'll say let it have ID. The next one is name, so we'll say name equals to, then let it have name. And lastly, the last one should be email, so we say email, then we'll say equals to, let it have email. So we have created the table, and we've created the contact, the rows that it's going to hold for us. So this is what the companion object will do. And then now we are going to create to implement the functions of these handler. So we'll just come here and right click and say implement members. So when we implement the members, we'll implement on create and on upgrade. So these ones create for us the database or update the database for us. So we have, so once you just click on implement members, it will create the, it will give you the on create, and then it will give you the on upgrade. So we are going to simply do now our query for creating a table. Just right here on Abacua on create. So we'll just come in and say val, then we'll say create. So So this is a variable we are creating, create contacts table. So we create a variable, create contacts table, then we'll say equals to, then we do our query. So our query itakuwa hivi, create table. So you say create table, that's the SQL. So create table, then which table do you want to create? Table contacts. Are we together? Then we concatenate and close. So we create table contacts, and then in this contacts table we are going to, so we want to pass some items, yeah, in this contacts table. So we want to pass some items, so we'll say we are going to want to have ID, name and email. So we'll say create contacts, then we'll start with the ID. So for ID, so we'll come and place our quotes in there, then we'll say we start with ID. So you can say ID, so you have that. So you can put this down so that it holds, yeah. So we say key ID, then we put the query, so we'll put our query in there. So we'll put our query and say integer, then we say this is a primary key. Sorry, we have that integer primary key, and then we'll place a comma, and then we continue with name. So we'll say plus, then we'll say key underscore name, then we'll concatenate as well. So we concatenate here. So for this we'll also concatenate. So we have key underscore name, then we put our query there. We want this to be specifically for text, so we'll say we want this to be text, then we'll put a comma. So we put a comma there, and then lastly we put the email. So we concatenate and say key email, sorry, so we say key email, then we concatenate with that, and then we put our quotes, and then we'll just say this one also we want it to be text, and once we put the text, we do the last concatenation. So there we have our create tables contact. Then we can now have your create contacts table there. So once you create your contacts table, then you're going to do an execution to create the table. So you'll just say db, so we call function db, then we'll say dot, then execute SQL, then what do we want to execute there? Create contacts table. But just to make this nullable, we just place our question mark. So we'll say db.execute SQL, and then it's going to execute our query. So that's it for the on create. For the on upgrade also will be quite easy. So for on upgrade, we'll just say DB. So we'll call our DB. So this is the DB we are calling the SQLITE database. So we'll say DB dot, then we'll say execute SQL. Then we'll just say drop table if exists. So you'll say drop table if exists, and then which table are we dropping if it exists? Then we'll say table contacts. So you have that. So we can also make this nullable. So we just put our quotes there, and then if the table exists, you drop it and then you recreate it, because this is a simple on upgrade. Then you'll say on create, then you'll just pass the database. So if you reinstall it, that's what it will do. If you like reinstall the app, it will drop, then recreate again. So that is what the on upgrade function does. So we have that. So once you do that, everything will be fine. So now the next thing is we are going to do the CRUD functions. So the CRUD functions, that is the first one is going to be add, that is create employee. Then we are going to do read, then we're going to do update, and then lastly you're going to do the delete. So we have the CRUD function. So we are going to create a method that is going to assist us to add an employee. So we'll say function, then we'll say add student. So we'll say add student. So function add student. Then what do we want to pass? We want to pass a student, who is the value of a student when we want to add a student. Then we'll make this data type to be long, and we're going to now do the function for add. So we are going to create a value for our database. So we'll say val, then db equals to, then we'll say this dot writable database. Then we'll create content values, which now will assist us to add the data. So we'll say content values. So we'll say val, then you call content values, content values. So we go to content value. So we'll say val content values. Then we have equals to, then we call a class for content values. Then you put that. So you have your val content values. Then we are going to say pass the ID, we are going to pass the name, and we're going to pass the email using the content values. So we'll simply come in and say now content values, then we'll say dot put. So when we say dot put, then we're now going to pass ID, name, and email. So we have the three of them. So we'll say content values dot put. So what do we put? The first one is going to be key ID. And what do we want to pass here? We want to pass student. So we'll say we want to pass student dot, then we'll say user ID. Hope I'm clear. Then we'll say here we pass key name, and what do we want to pass? Student dot user name. Then lastly we pass key email, and what do we want this to have? Student dot user student dot user email. So we have passed the ID, name, and email using the contact values. Then now after that, we are going to now insert into the row. So you can just simply come and say insert into row. So we do insert into the row. So we have the first one, which is going to be val, then we call a simple variable, we'll call success is equals to, then we'll say db dot, then we'll say insert. So it is going to place in the data. Then what do we want to insert? Which table? We want to insert into table contacts. What do we want to insert? We'll pass a null column, then we'll say content values. These are the values you're going to so these are the content values: username, ID, and string. And then once you insert them, you're going to do a close connection, and then you return the value. So we can just ensure our spelling is at least correct. So we can say db dot close connection, and then we can now do a return, because it's long, so we have to call return our success. So now it means it will make our database writable, use content values to pass the values from the student, use db.insert table contacts. What do we want to insert? These content values: user ID, name, and string. Then you're going to return the success. So that's it for insert. So that one is the first one. So CRAD add student, we have been able to add. So when we click our button add, we are going to use this function. Then secondly, we are going to use view. So read data. So for reading data, we are going to create a function view. So we'll say just function. We'll just say view, then we'll say student. And then what do we want to view? Let's remember we are going to be using list. So you'll say this is going to be a list, and this list should be for the student. So we have that, then create it and work on it. So we have the view student. So we'll just move that down. So for the student to work on the view, it's going to be quite simple. So we are going to call an array list that is going to hold for us the model class. So we'll say val then we can say student, we can call it list, then we'll say let this be a simple array list. We are going to pass the student class, and then we'll say this one will be equals to, then we'll say array list, and then we'll say what we want to pass, which is a student class. So we'll say we want to pass a student. So val student list, then we can say array list, alafu we pass the student, and then we can say select query. So we'll just pass val, then we call select query, then we can say equals to, then we do select all, then we'll say from, that's the query, then we we do table contacts. So this is going to select everything from the table contacts. And then we are now going to call our database, our readable database, so that we can be able to view this. So we'll just say val, then we call db dot db equals to, then we'll say this dot readable database. So we'll say now for us to view, we're going to do a capture and we're going to do an exception, a try exception. So we'll just say var, then we'll call a cursor. So we'll say var cursor, which we will define as a cursor as well. So as a cursor, then to be equals to, then we can say but let's make this nullable first so that we can define it. So we'll say var cursor equals to null. Then we are going to do a try. So this is just, we call in our try. So we'll say try, then cursor is equals to db dot, then we do row query, we pass our query, select query, and then we'll pass our now, and then we'll do a catch. So what do we want to catch? So we catch simple, so we can use e, so we can say e SQLITE. So e, so we say e SQLITE exception. So we define a simple e SQLITE exception, and then we now use that to catch. So we'll say db dot execute SQL, then we'll do our select query, and then if now everything is good, we are going to return our simple array list. So return a simple array list. So that is the try part. Alright, then we are just going to create a var. So we'll say var, then we call our user ID. We create a user ID function, then the user ID is going to be an integer. So these are the ones we're going to use to display. Then we can say var, then we'll say username, then we'll specify this as a string, and then we'll say var user email, and we specify this as a string as well. So we say username, we have that username, we have user email, and we have user ID. Then now we are going to use the cursor to display the items. So we are going to say, if cursor, so we'll do if, then we'll say cursor dot, then we'll say move to first. So if cursor dot move to first, then we can say do. So if cursor dot move to first, so we come and call our user. We'll start with user ID, then we'll say equals to. So user ID equals to, then we'll say cursor dot cursor, then we'll say cursor dot, then we'll say get int, and then we'll say cursor, we'll say cursor dot, then we say get column index. Then now we are going to pass the ID. And then for the next one, you're going to say username. So you're going to say user name, then equals to, so we call our cursor dot get string, then we'll say cursor dot get column index. Then here we'll now pass the name, and the next one we're going to pass email. So here we can say we want name, here we want email, but the holder for this should be user email. So we say username, we pass their user email. So once we have that, then we can call our do. So you can say val, then you say student, then you will say equals to, then we call student, the student class. Then we are going to pass, so you say user ID equals to, then we'll say user ID, then we'll say username equals to username, that is from the class. Then you say user email from the user email. So we have those three. Then now we can say our list, then we can add student. So we can say our list, so we will call our student list, then we'll say dot add, and we pass our value for student. So while, then we'll say cursor dot move to first, and then once we finish, we're going to return the list that we had created. So we'll return, then we'll say we want going to return our student list. So that's it for the passing the values and viewing the values. So in the next video, we are going to come and then we work on the update, we work on the delete, and then we're going to also create an adapter in the next video. So I'll see you in the next one to continue working on the database handler and other back-end functions.